Who put the lies in the truth that you sold us? The next song is Who Put the Weight of the World on My Shoulders. This is a very, as close as you could get really to a rare Oasis song, an Oasis rarity, because it's not on any albums, it wasn't released as a single, and it exists only officially, I think, on the soundtrack for the movie Goal. Goal was a vanity project by FIFA in the old Sepp Blatter days, which, looking back, he now looks like a visionary compared to the person who has taken his role since and has expanded the World Cup now to be what I think is going to be an unmanageable 42 teams, is that right? And putting the World Cup over an entire continental landmass across 3 massive countries with huge disparities in climate and altitude and lots of other things that come into play when you're organising a football tournament. And then going ahead and sucking up to the man in the White House who seems determined to absolutely sabotage all notion of a civilised, coherent society. And the current man in charge of FIFA is licking his hole. But besides that, it was a pretty shit film. It was supposed to be a football movie. I remember being sort of trailed with, they were going to have David Beckham in it, they were going to have Zidane was going to appear in it, possibly one or two, possibly Figo, I think, but generally the sort of Real Madrid superstars were all going to make a cameo, and they did. They were literally in a bar that the main character went into, and he saw them and said hello, and that was it. The whole thing about, being a sort of outsider trying to make it in football completely missed the mark on, any of that stuff. It appears that nobody in FIFA, at least not the shirt and ties, have any notion of what the actual game of football is like. Apparently a club who were in the Premiership at the time would give somebody a trial. Newcastle United was a club. They would give somebody a trial based on the fact that they did one trick in a trial session, in a training session. The guy flicked the ball over his head, turned the man behind him. On the basis of that, he got a trial. Not sure that's how it works. I'm pretty sure there's a bit more due diligence done when they're trying to sign people up into contracts, or else, you'd end up with somebody who claims to be George Weah's cousin and put him on the field for 20 minutes before you realise how utterly out of his depth he is, because that's not how you judge a good footballer. You have to actually see them play well against 11 other players. But the gem of the whole project, I think, was probably the soundtrack. It was produced by Uncle, Unkle, Uncle, who sort of under the radar have really made a big impact in the sort of post-Britpop sort of UK rock music, guitar rock music scene. They did a lot of work with Richard Ashcroft and The Verve, did work with Ian Brown to make his hit Dolphins, remixing his hit Dolphins Were Monkeys into a great, really rhythm-driven acoustic guitar number. And they produced this song as well. The song itself is another example of Noel Gallagher effortlessly, just inventing a melody that sings so harmoniously with relatively straightforward musicianship, or relatively straightforward instrumentation. This one does get a bit complicated, I'll get to that in a second, but it starts off with just a very slow arpeggiated, it starts off with just a strummed and let ring guitar note, so he lets the note ring. Again, starts off very disarmingly, and then the male melody comes in, which is the title of the song. Who put the weight of the world on my shoulders? That's just a lovely melody to apply to those words. Uncle really comes in because it's the string section comes in, which was a big thing that they were doing at the time. I assume there were sample strings. I don't think they actually got a string quartet or an orchestra in. I think they were probably just, from synths. But it really adds to the texture and not the sound volume, but the sort of, the volume, like your hair has volume. It adds to the volume of the song without overwhelming it. And although it does, there's wee bits where the mix isn't quite right, at least in the version I just listened to, where the strings sort of overwhelm the vocals. But they do add to the presentation of the overall song. The sentiment of the song, who put the weight of the world on my shoulders, I'm sure was coming from a place of, a place of genuine anxiety for Noel, because at the time they were just getting to the end of the Oasis lifespan. They had one more album to come after this, but it probably felt to him like he was trundling on with this really, really heavy baggage of carrying this band that he didn't like being in. He probably had to stick to a contract of releasing 3 albums with Big Brother or whatever it was, but everything sort of fell on him as a chief songwriter, as the band leader. He couldn't just leave Oasis the way Bonehead and Queasy left Oasis. It would no longer be Oasis. It would be Liam Gallagher and Friends, which of course would eventually end up becoming BDI. So, there's probably, and Oasis was one of the most guaranteeable hit records that the record industry could possibly hope for. That even just the notion of an Oasis album coming out was guaranteed. You basically clear the summer, and this is what our marketing campaign is going to be, because it's going to sell 50,000 copies, whether it's good or not. The idea that who put the weight in the world on his shoulders probably did speak to something that he was feeling. It's also a very universal feeling as well. Like, even if you're just, the sort of dog's body in the office, eventually you're going to feel like, why is everything sort of on me all of a sudden? Who put the weight of the world on my shoulders? Noel Gallagher has just won the Songwriter of the Year award at the 2026 Brit Awards, which will come as a great surprise to anyone else who had designs on that particular award, since he didn't actually release any new songs that he had written. Brit Awards are a bit of a puzzle. There might be at the point where they're a bit of a sort of a done deal. They might be sort of old hack. As an entity, as a notion, feels like it's not really that much of a big deal anymore. Case in point, Robbie Williams plus a lot of musicians from the 80s as their sort of headline final performance. Songwriter of the Year going to somebody who hasn't released songs in 5 years. Olivia Dean, she wins 4, and it'll largely be forgotten about apart from really, really determined quizzers. There used to also be a big showcase for acts to sort of get in front of audiences who maybe didn't see them before, and subsequently having their chart performances rise up. This year, the chart performances were totally anemic. I think the best performing chart return from a performer at the Brit Awards was they rose 3 places in the charts. It used to be that you'd pretty much get into the top 10, maybe even the top 5 on the back of a big Brit Awards performance. The viewership itself, The Masked Singer, I think it was, had 3 million views, and then the Brit Awards came directly after it and had 2 million views. So even though they're both music shows about popular music, lost nearly a third of its audience when it came to the Brit Awards. It's not another sign of how the paradigm of the popular taste has changed completely, and the industry is still harkening back to a model that is about 15 or 20 or 25 years out of date. I've started finding a few blogs who are going back into ancient charts. So I do read James Masterton, who does this week's chart, but there's the likes of a guy who's doing the indie charts from the 1980s, which obviously is a lot of Smiths. New Order songs I had never heard of were number 1 in the indie charts in the mid-80s. There's another guy doing sort of the Irish charts retrospective, so he's parallel doing the 70s and sort of the early 2000s. It is quite stark how much more was going on in the general scene, whereas it feels like now there doesn't seem to be that much disparity. There's the top of the charts, and then there's just everything else. Do you know what I mean? There doesn't seem to be a sort of middle ground anymore. It's the same with cinema. It's the same with, arguably it's becoming the same with football, that there's either the Champions League winning potentially winning teams, and then everything else. And there seemed to be a desperate appetite to remove everything else, so it's just the Champions League teams. And what's actually happening now is that, crowds are actually gravitating away from the Premier League. The Scottish Football League is getting a lot more popular. The League of Ireland is becoming a lot more popular. The people are, the likes of Dulwich Hamlets or Forest Green Rovers and those kind of teams, like the sort of the non-league teams, are now getting crowds to the doors because people want to see something a bit more authentic. They want to see something they can relate to. They want to see, they just want to see realness. Who put the weight of the world on my shoulders? It's number 49, so we are at the very cusp of the list now. There's one more song to go. It's from their final album, so it did actually get representation. It was very close to not having anything from Dig Out Your Soul. Stick around. Number 50 is coming up next.